In the glittering world of Regency England, Indilia Ravenshade, the daughter of a disgraced scholar, finds herself drawn into the orbit of Lord Ashbourne, a man whose charm hides a secret that could ruin them both. When society's cruel tongues turn whispers into ruin, and pride becomes their only shield, Indilia must decide, protect her family's honor, or follow the one man who could destroy it. The ballroom at Ashbourne Hall shimmered with the light of 100 candles, gowns rustled, jewels glittered, and every lady present seemed perfectly sculpted for admiration, except one. Miss Indilia Ravenshade, daughter of a once revered scholar now shunned by the ton, stood quietly by the window. Her gown, though modest, carried a grace no wealth could purchase. There was something uncontainable in her eyes, a spark that suggested thought, not vanity. Miss Ravenshade, drawled a voice behind her, rich with amusement. You seem unimpressed by my mother's ball. She turned slowly. The speaker, Lord Ashbourne, heir to one of England's oldest titles, was every inch the man's society. Adored, striking, poised, and far too aware of his own effect. I am impressed, my lord, Indilia replied, though perhaps not by the same things others are. Ah, he smiled, and what earns your admiration, if not chandeliers and champagne? Truth, she said simply. It was such an unfashionable word that he almost laughed. Then I fear, Miss Ravenshade, you are at the wrong century. Or perhaps, she replied, a hint of daring in her tone, the wrong ballroom. That was the moment he truly saw her. Not as another girl to amuse him, but as a riddle wrapped in defiance. Your father was the philosopher, wasn't he? Ashbourne said, the one who wrote the anatomy of morality before his unfortunate fall from grace. Indilia's expression did not falter, though her heart turned cold. My father's thoughts offended men who feared their own reflection. I suppose that was unfortunate. He studied her with new curiosity. You speak like one who knows too much of the world, Miss Ravenshade. I only know what it costs to be honest in it. Their eyes held. Something passed between them, sharp, fragile, and utterly forbidden. For beneath Ashbourne's practiced charm lay secrets darker than scandal, and in Indilia's courage lay the one thing he had long forgotten how to feel: shame. The morning after the Ashbourne ball dawned gray and unwelcoming, as if the heavens themselves disapproved of indulgence. But in the grand salons of Mayfair, gossip danced brighter than the chandeliers had the night before, and at the center of that glittering storm stood a single name, Miss Indilia Ravenshade, a scholar's daughter with opinions. Imagine the audacity. They say Lord Ashbourne actually listened to her. Listened, my dear. He smiled at her. Whispers spread like ink through silk. Every teacup trembled with the sound of scandal. Indilia, however, was unaware of the commotion she had caused. She spent her morning tending to her father, whose frail hands now trembled too violently to hold a quill. His mind wandered between lucidity and loss, a great intellect dimmed by time and betrayal. Did they laugh at you, my darling? He asked suddenly, his eyes unfocused. No, Papa, she said softly, tucking the blanket closer around him. They did not laugh. They only stared. Then they are fools, he murmured, sinking back into his chair. They stare at what they cannot understand. A knock interrupted the silence. Their housekeeper, Mrs. Denning, appeared with wide eyes and a folded letter upon a silver tray. A message, Miss Ravenshade, from Ashbourne Hall. Indilia's hand stilled. Her name, written in a bold, masculine hand, gleamed against the parchment like a challenge. Miss Ravenshade, I find myself troubled by our conversation and intrigued by its echo. Might I call upon you this afternoon, under the guise of returning a misplaced fan? L. Ashbourne. Her heart gave a small, disobedient leap. Tell him no, her mind whispered. But her lips, treacherous as they were honest, said quietly, see that he is received in the drawing-room at 4. The clock had not yet struck 4 when the knock came. Ashbourne entered without hesitation, dressed in dark navy that seemed too deliberate for an afternoon visit. His gaze swept the humble room with polite curiosity before finding her. You keep a quiet home, he remarked. Almost peaceful. Peace, she said, pouring tea without invitation, is all my father and I have left. He accepted the cup, but did not drink. You intrigue me, Miss Ravenshade. That is not a compliment I give lightly. I'm not sure it is one I desire, she replied. He smiled, a little ruefully. And yet, here I am, returning a fan that never belonged to you. Her brow arched. Then why are you here, my lord? He leaned forward slightly, the distance between them narrowing until the air itself seemed to hum. Because I cannot stop thinking about what you said. About truth, she echoed. It has a way of unsettling those unaccustomed to it. Indeed. And yet, his gaze darkened. I find myself craving more of your unsettling company. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The sound of her father coughing upstairs shattered the silence. Ashbourne rose immediately, his expression shifting from charm to discomfort. Forgive me, I should not have intruded. You didn't, she said quietly. You only reminded me why I must guard what little peace I have. He hesitated at the door, his hand on the frame. You think me dangerous, Miss Ravenshade. I think, she said slowly, you have never been told no. And I think you don't quite know what to do with a woman who isn't impressed by your title. He looked at her then, not as a curiosity, but as an equal. You may be right, he admitted softly, but you see, that only makes you more dangerous to me. When he left, Indilia stood motionless by the window. The fan, his invented excuse, lay unopened upon the table. But inside it, hidden within folded silk, she later found a note. Be wary, Miss Ravenshade. There are men in this city who would ruin you for far less than honesty, and one of them wears my face. Her breath caught. The letters swam before her eyes. For the first time, Indilia Ravenshade understood that truth and danger often wore the same smile. 3 days passed since the Duke's visit, yet Indilia's thoughts had refused to obey her. Every time she sat down to write, his words crept back between the ink lines. Be wary. There are men who would ruin you, and one of them wears my face. It was a warning, but also a confession. By the 4th morning, a new envelope arrived. It bore the black wax seal of Ashbourne Hall, stamped with the raven sigil that once stood for pride and power. Mrs. Denning looked uneasy as she handed it over. They say no woman goes to Ashbourne Hall alone. Miss, not unless she intends to stay. Indilia tore the letter open anyway. Her pulse quickened as her eyes swept over the elegant script. Miss Ravenshade, me mother is hosting an intimate musicale this Friday, a modest gathering of artists and scholars. I would be most honored if you would attend. I suspect you might enjoy hearing ideas untainted by polite society. If you dare risk being seen in my company again. L. Ashbourne, a smile, unwilling but real, tugged at her lips. If you dare risk being seen. He knew exactly what he was doing. That Friday, Indilia stood before her mirror, uncertain of everything. Her reflection, her courage, even her sanity. She wore a gown of soft lilac silk, one borrowed from a friend of better fortune. The neckline was modest, yet the color betrayed the secret of her youth. Mrs. Denning's hands trembled as she fastened the final pearl clasp. Remember who you are, she said, and remember he is not for you. I am not for anyone, Indilia replied, her voice calm but distant. Ashbourne Hall glowed like a dream half, drenched in moonlight. Torches burned along the grand staircase, and the music that spilled from inside felt like a spell she hadn't meant to hear. She was announced, Miss Indilia Ravenshade, and suddenly every painted face turned her way. The room hushed, and then he appeared, the Duke of Ashbourne, tall, severe, draped in a coat of black velvet, moved toward her as though he'd been expecting no one else. His eyes softened briefly as they met hers. You came, he said simply. You invited me, she countered, though her voice betrayed the flutter in her chest. I invite many, he murmured, stepping closer, but few have the courage to arrive. Before she could answer, he offered his arm. Allow me to introduce you to a world where truth is whispered behind wine glasses. The evening unfolded like a painting, glittering, intoxicating, but edged with shadows. Artists, philosophers, and titled men gathered around a long table strewn with candlelight and arrogance. Indilia sat between a poet who smelled of brandy and a countess whose laughter was sharper than glass. And across from her, always, endlessly, was Ashbourne. Their eyes met too often. Their words collided too easily. It wasn't romance. It was recognition. the uneasy acknowledgement of two people who had both seen too much of the world's falsehood. A guest raised his glass and said loudly, "I hear Miss Ravenshade has been tutoring the children of scholars." "How noble," the countess beside him smirked. "Indeed, quite charitable of his grace to notice her efforts." The implication hung heavy in the air, a subtle poison disguised as humor. Indilia set down her glass with perfect composure. "A nobleman's notice is rarely charity," she said coolly. "It is often curiosity, and curiosity, when unchecked, becomes obsession." Ashbourne's expression darkened, not with anger, but admiration. "Then let us hope," he said softly, "that my curiosity never burns that far." The table fell silent. Even the violins seemed to hold their breath. Later that night, as the guests drifted toward their carriages, Indilia found herself alone on the terrace. The air was cold, scented faintly with roses and rain. She thought herself unseen, until the Duke stepped from the shadows. "You shouldn't walk alone out here," he said, his tone lower than before. "Is that another warning? Perhaps a habit." "You warned me once before," she reminded him. "And yet, you keep coming closer." He hesitated. "Because I keep meaning to stay away, and failing." Then he took her hand, not to kiss it, but simply to hold it. "Indilia," he said quietly, "do you believe a man can crave peace more than passion?" Her heart twisted at the rawness in his voice. "Only, if he has lost both." He looked at her then, not as a duke or a man of power, but as something wounded and entirely real. Before she could say more, the great doors opened, and Lady Ashbourne's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Lucian," she called, "a word now." The moment shattered like thin glass. Indilia withdrew her hand. "You should go, my lord." But as he turned to leave, she noticed, tucked into her glove, another folded note. She hadn't even felt him slip it there. "Do not come to the gardens tomorrow. They are no longer safe." Her breath caught. What could that mean? As the last carriages rolled away and the music faded into silence, Indilia knew only this: whatever Lucian Ashbourne was hiding, it was powerful enough to make even him afraid. The next morning dawned bleak and restless, clouds moving low across the sky like the world itself had grown cautious. Indilia hadn't slept. She'd spent the night staring at the note he'd slipped into her glove, reading it again and again, until the ink blurred. "Do not come to the gardens tomorrow. They are no longer safe." Safe from what? Or from whom? By noon, even Mrs. Denning noticed her unease. "You've been pacing since sunrise," the old woman said, folding sheets by the hearth. "Did the Duke say something untoward?" Indilia hesitated. He said something worse. He said nothing at all. Before Mrs. Denning could press further, the bell clanged at the front door. A rider stood outside, his boots splattered with mud, his face grave. "Message for Miss Ravenshade," he said. The letter bore no seal, just her name in hurried handwriting she recognized instantly. "Lucian Ashbourne, Indilia. If anyone asks, you were never invited last night. Tell no one we spoke. And whatever happens today, do not open your door to anyone wearing the Ashbourne crest." Her heart stuttered. Whatever this was, it had turned from flirtation to danger with terrifying speed. By late afternoon, the world outside grew unnaturally still. Even the birds had quieted. Indilia sat at her writing desk, watching the lane beyond her window, and that was when she saw it. A black carriage bearing the Ashbourne crest, a silver raven with spread wings, rolling slowly toward her gate. Her blood ran cold. Mrs. Denning peeked through the curtain. "Miss, that's the Duke's crest. Perhaps he's come." "No," Indilia said sharply. "Not him. Stay away from the door." The knock came anyway. 3 firm strikes that rattled the hinges. "Miss Ravenshade." A man's voice smooth and commanding. "By order of His Grace, we are to escort you to Ashbourne Hall at once." His Grace. But Lucian had warned her against anyone bearing his name. "Tell them nothing," she whispered to Mrs. Denning, her mind racing. "Say I'm ill." Mrs. Denning nodded, but before she could move, the door burst open. 2 uniformed men stepped inside, both bearing the Raven emblem on their coats. "Miss Ravenshade," the taller one said coldly, "His Grace requests your immediate presence regarding matters of your father's estate." "My father's estate," Indilia repeated, startled. My father owns nothing but his books. Precisely, the man said with a thin smile. And yet one of those books contains something that belongs to Ashbourne Hall. They took her carriage, bound, not unkindly, but without allowing refusal. The ride was long, the air thick with silence. Through the rain, streaked glass, she saw Ashbourne Hall rising on the horizon, vast, Gothic, its towers clawing the gray sky. The gates groaned open. Inside, the hall was strangely quiet. No servants, no music, only the echo of her own footsteps. A figure appeared at the end of the corridor, not Lucian, but an older man with cold, intelligent eyes. His resemblance to the Duke was unmistakable. Miss Ravenshade, he said, bowing slightly. I am Lord Edwin Ashbourne, the Duke's uncle. You and I must have a conversation. In the dim light of the drawing room, he gestured for her to sit. You are wondering, he said smoothly, why a woman of no fortune or title should interest the Ashbourne family. I am wondering, she replied, why the Ashbourne family sends armed men to fetch guests who never ask to come. A smile flickered on his lips. Clever. But tell me, has my nephew spoken to you of your father? Her heart froze. My father. He barely leaves his chair. What could he possibly have to do with your family? Lord Edwin's gaze sharpened. 30 years ago, your father worked for us, as a tutor, a scholar. But he stole something from my brother's study, a manuscript. The only surviving journal of Roderick Ashbourne, our ancestor. Indilia's breath caught. That's impossible. Is it? He leaned forward. The journal contained names, Miss Ravenshade, and secrets, the kind that can ruin men still living, if it exists. And if your father kept it, then you understand why my nephew should never have sought your acquaintance. She stared at him. Horror dawning. You think Lucian. I think Lucian is too sentimental for his own good, Lord Edwin interrupted. And you are his weakness. He stood abruptly. Tell me where the journal is, and you may leave this house unharmed. Indilia rose too, her voice trembling, but fierce. I will tell you nothing. My father may be frail, but he is not a thief. Lord Edwin's expression hardened. Then you leave me no choice. Before she could react, 2 men stepped forward. Take her to the West Wing, he ordered. Lock her there until she remembers. As they dragged her down the corridor, Indilia caught a flash of movement, a tall figure emerging from the shadows. Lucian. His eyes blazed when he saw her. Fury and fear mingled in equal measure. Release her, he thundered. Now, the guards froze uncertain. My lord, your uncle's orders. I am your duke, Lucian roared. And you will obey me. He crossed the hall in 2 strides, catching Indilia by the arm, not roughly, but protectively. Go, he whispered. Now, before he realizes what I've done, she hesitated. Lucian, what is happening? His jaw tightened. Everything I warned you about. My family, the journal, and the reason I can never be the man you think I am. Their eyes met. 1,000 unspoken things between them, before he pulled her toward a hidden passage behind the staircase. Go to the old chapel in the woods, he said breathlessly. Wait there until I come for you. She wanted to ask why, wanted to demand truth, but there was no time. The doors behind them burst open. Lord Edwin's voice echoed like thunder. Lucian, what have you done? Lucian turned, his face pale but resolute. What I should have done long ago. And as Indilia fled into the storm, she heard the Duke's voice one last time, raw, defiant, and filled with something dangerously close to love. Touch her, and you'll lose more than your name. You'll lose your soul. The rain did not stop that night. It fell harder, as though the sky itself mourned something unseen. Indilia ran through the woods, her gown heavy with mud, the air sharp with pine and lightning. Behind her, the lights of Ashbourne Hall burned faintly, like the eyes of a wounded beast. Ahead, half hidden by ivy and decay, rose the old chapel, the one villagers whispered about, the one said to house the dead who could not rest. By the time she pushed open its rotting doors, her breath was ragged, her heart a wild drum. The interior smelled of damp stone and forgotten prayers. Stained glass windows wept rainwater onto cracked marble floors. But at the altar's base, beneath a cloth blackened by age, something glimmered, a candle, lit, Someone had been here recently. She froze, straining to hear beyond the rain. A sound, a breath, a step. But there was only silence. Still, the candle's small, defiant flame comforted her. She sank to the floor, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. The ache of fear gave way to exhaustion, and her thoughts blurred into fragments. Lucian's warning, her father's trembling hands, Lord Edwin's cold eyes, the journal. It all returned to that word. If her father had truly taken it, what could be inside so valuable that men of power still hunted it decades later? When morning came, the chapel was shrouded in mist. Indilia woke to the sound of a creaking door. Her breath caught. She reached for a broken candlestick, the only thing resembling a weapon. But it was not a soldier. It was Lucien. He looked nothing like the Duke she had first met. His coat was torn, his hair damp, and his expression stripped of all civility. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, relief and anger colliding. "And leave you alone in this place," he said, half smiling, despite the shadows under his eyes. "I may be many things, Indilia, but I am not a coward." She rose to face him. "Your uncle knows about my father." "I know," he said bitterly. "He's known all along. He was the one who ordered the manuscript stolen 30 years ago. Your father only took it to protect someone." "Protect whom?" Lucian hesitated. Then, quietly, "My mother." Indilia stared. "Your mother?" "She was no saint," he said. "But she discovered something in that journal. Something about our family line. She believed my uncle had it destroyed to erase the proof." Her knees weakened. "That's impossible. My father is a scholar," Lucian finished for her. "Yes, but he was also the only surviving son of the first Duke's illegitimate child. My family covered it up to keep their hold on the estate. That's why my uncle wants that journal. It holds the original signatures and letters confirming it." Indilia staggered back. "So, he'll do anything to destroy it, and anyone connected to it." Lucian nodded grimly. "Including you." A storm of realization tore through her. Every warning, every cryptic glance, every moment of hesitation from Lucien suddenly made sense. "You knew," she said softly. "All along, you knew who I was." He met her gaze. "I suspected. But I didn't want it to be true." "Because it meant what?" she demanded. "That I had claim to your fortune, your name?" "No," he said, stepping closer, voice low. "Because it meant I had no right to want you." Her breath caught, not from fear this time, but from the unbearable tenderness in his tone. "You have every right," she whispered. For a moment, the world shrank to the space between them. The sound of the rain, the flicker of candlelight, the weight of everything they could never say aloud. Lucian reached for her hand, hesitant, reverent, but before his fingers could touch hers, the chapel door burst open. "Search every corner!" A voice shouted. They were seen heading this way. Lucian's expression hardened. "My uncle's men." He turned to her, urgent now. "There's a passage beneath the altar. My mother used it years ago when she fled this estate. Go now." "What about you?" He drew a pistol from his coat. "I'll delay them." "No, you can't." He pressed a hand to her cheek. "Indilia, listen to me. You are the rightful heir to everything I was raised to protect. But I will not let this family destroy another innocent soul." Tears welled in her eyes. "Lucien, go," he whispered, "before I lose the courage to let you." She hesitated only long enough to memorize his face, the curve of his jaw, the haunted kindness in his eyes. And then she slipped behind the altar. The hidden door creaked open, revealing a narrow tunnel lit by dying torches. As she descended, the last thing she heard was the echo of Lucian's voice above. "You'll have to go through me first, uncle." Gunfire erupted, then silence. Indilia bit her fist to keep from crying out, stumbling through the darkness until she emerged into the cold dawn outside the forest. She didn't know if Lucian was alive. She didn't know what waited ahead. But in her pocket, wrapped in silk and trembling hands, was the one thing that could change everything: her father's old journal. The London season had begun in a whirl of carriages, lace fans and glittering chandeliers. But for Lady Indilia Moreau, every evening felt like stepping into a battlefield. Each ball, each soirée, each dinner was another duel of glances, another test of grace and wit. And somewhere across the polished marble floors, Lord Sebastian Harcourt watched her, not as the others did, with amusement or envy, but with a strange, dangerous calm that unsettled her soul. Tonight, beneath the chandeliers of the Whitmore estate, Indilia stood near a grand piano, pretending to listen to a gentleman's boast about his hunting dogs. Her attention, however, was fixed elsewhere, on the dark figure by the balcony doors, his black coat lined with silver trim, his hair glinting like night itself. Sebastian's gaze met hers, steady, quiet, and devastatingly aware. She turned her head quickly, cheeks warming, but her heart refused to listen. "Lady Moreau," came his voice behind her, deep low and laced with danger. "Do you always flee when the music starts?" Indilia turned, breath caught halfway. He stood closer than propriety allowed, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the piano. "I do not flee," she said softly. "I simply do not dance with wolves." His lips curved, the faintest ghost of a smile. "Then perhaps, my lady, you have yet to meet one who does not bite." For a long, delicate moment, they said nothing, only watched the other with attention that could have set the room aflame. Then he offered his hand. "Dance with me." Every eye in the ballroom turned when she accepted. The music swelled, violins trembling under the weight of their unspoken truths, as he led her into the waltz. Sebastian's hand found the small of her back. His touch was sure, almost possessive, yet careful, as if he feared she might shatter. Their bodies moved in perfect rhythm, but their hearts warred in silence. "You are not like the others," he murmured. "And you are precisely what society warns me against," she replied. He laughed, not mockingly, but with something raw. "Then perhaps we are both doomed." As the final note faded, neither bowed nor curtsied. They simply stood breathless, staring, the world around them melting into nothing, and in that instant, Indilia knew two truths that terrified her. She had fallen for a man whose every glance carried ruin, and worse, he had fallen for her too. When he released her hand, his voice was quiet. "If I asked for another dance, would you refuse me again?" Her answer trembled at her lips. "No, my lord, I believe I would not." That night, as Indilia sat by her window watching the city lights fade into dawn, she realized that for the first time in her life, she was no longer afraid of scandal, only of silence. Because silence, in his absence, was unbearable. The rain came down in soft, trembling sheets, brushing against the wide windows of Ravenshire Manor like a lover's sigh. The air was heavy, not only with the coming storm, but with the weight of all that had remained unsaid between Lady Indilia Moreau and Lord Sebastian Harcourt. For days, they had danced around each other like twin stars caught in opposite orbits, bound by gravity, yet afraid of the inevitable pull. But that evening, fate decided to close the distance. Indilia had come to return the Duke's sister's forgotten shawl. Or so she told herself. But as her carriage rolled up the winding road toward the manor, her pulse betrayed her calm. The rain turned the cobblestones slick, the lamps flickered against the wind, and her heart, oh, her heart, pounded like a trapped bird. When she stepped inside, the butler informed her that his grace was in the library. Of course he was. The man seemed carved from solitude and midnight ink. She found him there, leaning against the mantelpiece, the light of the fire painting gold across his sharp, unreadable face. He looked up, startled, though the flicker in his eyes wasn't surprise, but recognition, as though some part of him had been waiting for her. "Lady Moreau," he said quietly, "to what do I owe the pleasure of your visit in such weather?" She hesitated, holding up the shawl like a shield. "I thought Lady Eleanor might need this." His lips curved faintly. "And deny me the honor of your company," he murmured. "That would be cruel." She turned toward the fire to hide her blush. "You mistake kindness for cruelty, my lord." "And you mistake caution for wisdom," he replied softly. "Tell me, Indilia, is it wisdom that makes you tremble whenever I am near?" Her name on his lips, low, dangerous, intimate, sent a shiver through her. "You overstep your grace." "I know," he whispered, stepping closer. "But I am so very tired of restraint." The air thickened. Rain drummed harder against the windows, thunder rolling like a warning from the heavens. She tried to move, to breathe, to speak, but he was already near enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "Do you ever tire of pretending?" he asked. "Pretending? That you do not feel it too." The silence that followed was not empty. It was electric. Outside, lightning split the sky inside. her defenses cracked with equal violence. "You do not understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Your world is not mine. A union between us would destroy me." "Then let it," Sebastian said fiercely. "Let the world burn, if it must. But do not deny the truth between us." He reached for her hand, not with arrogance, but reverence, as if he were touching something sacred. She should have pulled away. She didn't. Their eyes met, storm meeting storm, and for a heartbeat, time surrendered. Then, from the hall, a sharp knock broke the spell. The door creaked open. His steward appeared, dripping with rain. "Your Grace," the man said stiffly, "Lord Blackthorne has arrived. He insists upon seeing you." The Duke's expression hardened instantly. He let go of her hand. The warmth vanished. "Tell him to wait." But Indilia, gathering her composure, stepped back. "Number, you must see him. I should not have come." "Indilia, good night, my lord." She left before he could stop her, her gown whispering across the marble floor like a farewell. Sebastian stood still, his hand half raised in the silence she left behind, thunder echoing in his chest. He had never feared war. He had never feared scandal. But the thought of losing her, that frightened him more than any storm. The next morning dawned gray and bitter, as if the heavens themselves had grown weary of pretending. Ravenshire's gardens lay drenched and silent. The roses bowed beneath the weight of the storm that had raged through the night, much like the hearts of those who lived within its walls. Lady Indilia Moreau awoke with a heaviness she could not name. Her thoughts replayed the Duke's words. "Then let the world burn." They were reckless, wild, terrifyingly sincere, and they had carved themselves into her soul. But by midday, London was whispering. The first rumor reached her household through the servants. By evening, it had spread across every drawing room, every tea table, every viciously polite mouth in Mayfair. The Duke of Harcourt was seen alone in the library last night, with Lady Moreau, unchaperoned. At that hour, in that weather, my dear, there's only one reason a lady would visit a man so late. Indilia felt the walls close in around her. One careless moment, one stolen heartbeat, and her name was ash on society's tongue. Her mother burst into her room, eyes wide with dread. "Indilia, what have you done?" "Nothing," she whispered. "I did nothing. They say he intends to make amends through marriage. You must accept if he asks. Do you hear me? And if he doesn't, then, my dear, we are ruined." At that same hour, in Ravenshire's great hall, Duke Sebastian Harcourt stood before Lord Blackthorne, his oldest rival, and the man who had once courted Indilia himself. "You've started quite the scandal, Harcourt," Blackthorne said coldly. "Lady Moreau's reputation trembles on the edge of ruin. If you are half the gentleman society believes you to be, you will marry her at once." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "And if I do not? Then she will be destroyed. You know how these vultures feed. Her family will be cast out, her sisters will never marry, and her name will be a jest in every ballroom." The Duke turned toward the fire. Flames leapt and cracked, their light reflecting in the steel of his eyes. He had spent his life commanding armies, rebuilding estates, mastering the cold art of control. Yet the thought of her suffering because of him made his pulse shatter. "Leave," he said finally. "I know what must be done." That night, Indilia received a sealed letter bearing the Harcourt crest. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. "My dearest Indilia, London has decided our fate, but I will not let them write our story in ink dipped in scandal. Meet me tomorrow at dawn, by the old chapel near Ravenshire's East Garden. There, I will ask you, not as a duke, but as a man, to be my wife. If you cannot forgive me for the ruin I've caused, then burn this letter, and I shall never speak your name again." She did not sleep that night. She stood by her window, watching the last of the storm fade into the horizon. When dawn came, she dressed in the softest ivory gown she owned and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Her heart ached, with fear, with longing, with the unbearable tenderness of what might come next. The chapel stood at the edge of the gardens, covered in ivy and silence. Inside, the Duke waited, his cloak damp with dew, his eyes alight with something between guilt and hope. "You came," he breathed. "I came to hear you," she said. "Then hear me," he said, stepping closer. "Not as society demands, not as titles dictate, but as a man who has loved you from the first word you ever spoke." Her lips parted in disbelief. "Love you never said. Because I feared it, he interrupted. Because I thought myself too broken to love anyone, least of all someone as pure as you. But when I saw the world turn against you, I realized I could bear their hatred, but not your pain. Tears shimmered in her eyes. And if I accept, the scandal will stain us both. Then let it, he said, voice low and fierce. Let them whisper. Let them curse. Let them call me mad, but let me have you, even if all of London burns for it. She closed her eyes, the last wall inside her breaking. Then you shall have me, she whispered. Not because the world demands it, but because my heart already has. He took her hand and pressed it to his lips, not with passion, but devotion. Outside, the storm clouds finally broke apart, revealing a pale sun spilling gold through the chapel's broken windows. In that fragile light, their scandal became something far greater, a story not of ruin, but redemption,